Charlie Crow wiped the sweat from his brow, squinting at the mess of wires before him. The hum of the space station's life support systems provided a constant backdrop to his work, a reminder of the thin barrier between them and the vast emptiness of space. "Come on, you stubborn piece of junk," he muttered, yanking at a particularly obstinate cable. The maintenance panel sparked, and Charlie jerked his hand back with a yelp. "Fantastic. Just what I needed today." He sucked on his singed finger, glancing around the deserted corridor. The station seemed eerily quiet, most of the crew gathered in the observation deck to catch a glimpse of the arriving Arctal delegation. Charlie snorted, as if gawking at some stuck-up aliens was more important than keeping the station running. The comm link on his wrist buzzed. "Crow, where the hell are you?" Charlie sighed, recognizing the grating voice of his supervisor, Jenkins. "Fixing the Atmo regulator on level 3, sir, like you asked." "Well, wrap it up and get your ass to hydroponics. We've got a situation." "On my way," Charlie grumbled, shoving his tools back into his belt. So much for a quiet day of routine maintenance. As he made his way through the winding corridors, snatches of excited conversation drifted from passing crew members. "Did you see them? They're enormous. I heard their skin actually glows. They wouldn't even look at the ambassador, just stood there, all high and mighty." Charlie rolled his eyes. He'd seen the footage of the Arctals, of course. Who hadn't? But he couldn't understand the fascination. Sure, they were tall and blue and sparkly. So what? They were probably just as screwed up as humans, just with a fancier paint job. He rounded the corner to hydroponics and stopped short. A crowd had gathered outside the sealed doors, faces pressed against the observation window. Charlie elbowed his way through, muttering apologies. "Jenkins? What's going on?" His supervisor's ruddy face appeared, looking even more flustered than usual. "Crow, about time. We've got an intruder in there. One of the aliens slipped away from the delegation. It's messing with the equipment." Charlie peered through the glass. At first, he saw nothing but the lush greenery of the hydroponic gardens. Then a flash of movement caught his eye. A tall figure darted between the rows of plants, decidedly not human. "Shit," Charlie breathed. "What do you want me to do?" Jenkins wrung his hands. "Security's on their way, but we can't let that thing damage our food supply. You're the only tech cleared for emergency entry. Get in there and make sure it doesn't break anything vital." Charlie's eyes widened. "You want me to confront an alien? Alone?" "You're not confronting it, you idiot," Jenkins snapped. "Just distract it. Keep it from touching anything important until security arrives." Charlie swallowed hard, looking back through the window. The alien, Arctal, he corrected himself, was examining one of the nutrient dispensers with obvious curiosity. It didn't look particularly threatening, just big. "Fine," he sighed, "but if I get squashed by a giant blueberry, I'm haunting your ass." Jenkins shoved an access card into his hand. "Just go!" Charlie approached the airlock, swiping the card with trembling fingers. The door hissed open, and he stepped inside, the humid air of the hydroponics bay enveloping him. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. "Hello," he called out, wincing at how his voice cracked. Honored guest? I don't suppose you'd mind stepping away from the expensive equipment?" A rustle of movement, and suddenly the Arctal was there, looming over him. Charlie's breath caught in his throat. The alien was easily 8 feet tall, with midnight blue skin etched with intricate golden patterns. And definitely female, if the curves beneath the shimmering robe were any indication. Her luminous golden eyes fixed on Charlie, narrowing slightly. "You are not security," she said, her voice low and melodious. Charlie blinked, surprised by her perfect English. No, I'm Charlie, the repair guy." He gestured vaguely at his tool belt. "I'm just here to make sure nothing gets broken. Not that you'd break anything on purpose. I'm sure you're very careful and, coordinated." To his astonishment, the Arctal's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. "I am Lyra," she said, "and I assure you, my coordination is exemplary." As if to prove her point, she reached out and delicately plucked a ripe tomato from a nearby vine. Charlie couldn't help but notice the graceful movement of her long fingers, each tipped with a small, sharp claw. Right, he said, swallowing hard. So, Lyra, not that I'm not thrilled to meet you, but why exactly are you in here? Shouldn't you be with the rest of your delegation? Lyra's expression darkened. The talks are not progressing as hoped. Your leaders fear us. They see our size, our strength, and assume we are brutes. She crushed the tomato in her hand, red pulp oozing between her fingers. I grew tired of their trembling and came to examine your technology instead. It is, quaint. Charlie bristled at that. Hey, our tech might not be as advanced as yours, but it works. Usually, he eyed the mess of tomato. And maybe ease up on the produce. We kind of need that to eat. To his surprise, Lyra looked chagrined. My apologies. I did not intend to damage your resources. She glanced around. Perhaps you could show me how these systems function? I am curious. Charlie hesitated. On one hand, he probably shouldn't be giving impromptu tours to alien diplomats. On the other, when was he ever going to get a chance like this again? Sure, he found himself saying. Why not? But, try not to touch anything without asking first, okay? Some of this stuff is pretty delicate. Lyra inclined her head regally. I shall endeavor to control myself. As Charlie led her through the hydroponics bay, explaining the various systems, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Lyra asked intelligent questions, but there was an undercurrent of something in her tone. Amusement? Condescension? So, this regulates the nutrient flow, he said, pointing to a complex array of tubes and valves. It's actually pretty similar to the life support systems I was working on earlier. You've got to be careful with the calibration, though. One wrong move and... Lyra reached out, her long fingers dancing over the controls with surprising dexterity. Before Charlie could stop her, she'd adjusted several settings in rapid succession. Hey, he yelped. What are you doing? Lyra stepped back, a satisfied smile on her face. Improving your efficiency by 12.7%. Your system was adequate, but there was room for optimization. Charlie gaped at her. How did you even know how to do that? She raised an eyebrow, the golden markings on her face shifting with the movement. I told you, Charlie, I am very coordinated. He shook his head, torn between admiration and irritation. Okay, that's impressive. But seriously, you can't just go messing with our equipment. What if you'd broken something? Lyra's eyes flashed. You doubt my abilities? That's not what I meant, Charlie backpedaled. It's just, look, we barely know anything about each other's species. For all I know, you could accidentally trigger some catastrophic reaction just by touching the wrong thing with your alien biochemistry or whatever. Lyra tilted her head, regarding him curiously. You are not afraid of me, Charlie blinked. Should I be? Most of your kind are. They see our size, our strength, and they cower. She took a step closer, looming over him. Does my presence not intimidate you, little human? Charlie's heart raced, but not entirely from fear. There was something in Lyra's gaze, a spark of challenge, interest. He squared his shoulders, looking up to meet her eyes. Honestly, you're pretty intimidating, he admitted, but I've dealt with scarier things than tall blue aliens. You should see Jenkins when someone messes up his filing system. Lyra's lips curved into a genuine smile, revealing teeth that were just a bit too sharp to be human. You are unexpected, Charlie the repair guy. Thanks, I think. Charlie rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. So, now that you've optimized our systems, maybe we should head back. I'm pretty sure security is on their way, and I'd rather not explain why I've been giving unauthorized tours to alien diplomats. Lyra's smile faded. I suppose you are right, though I find your company far more agreeable than that of your pompous officials. Charlie couldn't help but grin. Well, if you ever want a break from the stuffed shirts, you know where to find me. I'll be the guy covered in grease, cursing at malfunctioning equipment. I shall keep that in mind, Lyra said, her golden eyes twinkling with what might have been mischief. As they made their way back to the airlock, Charlie couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. Lyra moved with a grace that seemed at odds with her massive size, her eyes darting to take in every detail of their surroundings. "So," he said, trying to sound casual, "is this your first time on a human space station?" Lyra nodded. "It is different than I expected. More chaotic, less efficient." She paused, then added, "But not without charm." Charlie snorted. "Yeah, that's us. Chaotic and inefficient, but charming." He hesitated, then asked, "What about you? What's your world like?" For a moment, Lyra's composure slipped. A flash of something, longing, sadness, crossed her features before she schooled them back into a neutral expression. "Finara is orderly," she said. "Beautiful, but often cold. We value strength, discipline, perfection." She glanced at Charlie. "Your people's tendency toward disorder and emotional display is perplexing to us." Charlie frowned. "Sounds pretty rigid. Don't you ever, I don't know, let loose? Have fun?" Lyra's brow furrowed. "Fun is not a priority in our culture." "Well, that explains a lot," Charlie muttered. They reached the airlock and Charlie felt a strange reluctance to end their encounter. Lyra seemed to hesitate as well, her hand hovering over the door controls. "Charlie," she said, her voice softer than before, "I appreciate your willingness to speak with me, to treat me as a person rather than a curiosity or a threat." Charlie shrugged, trying to ignore the warmth spreading through his chest. "Hey, alien or not, you're just people. Really tall, really blue people. But still." Lyra's lips curved into that not-quite smile again. "Indeed, perhaps there is hope for our species to find common ground after all." The moment was shattered by the sound of heavy footsteps approaching. Security, finally arriving on the scene. "You should go," Charlie said urgently. "I'll tell them you left through the other exit. Just try not to get caught sneaking around again, okay? I don't want to see you get in trouble." Lyra nodded, her expression unreadable. "Until we meet again, Charlie the repair guy." She pressed the airlock controls, slipping through the door with surprising speed for someone her size. Charlie watched her go, his mind reeling from the encounter. As the security team burst in, led by a red-faced Jenkins, Charlie plastered on his best innocent expression. "False alarm, guys," he said cheerfully. "Just a malfunction in the nutrient dispensers. All fixed now." Jenkins eyed him suspiciously. "And the alien?" Charlie shrugged. "Must have left before I got here. Probably got bored and went back to the delegation." As he fielded questions and tried to look competent, Charlie's thoughts kept drifting back to Lyra. He had a feeling their paths would cross again, and soon. The idea should have terrified him, but instead he felt a thrill of anticipation. Life on the station had just gotten a whole lot more interesting. Charlie's heart raced as he slipped through the dimly lit corridors of the station. It had been 3 days since his encounter with Lyra in the hydroponics bay, and he couldn't shake the memory of her luminous, golden eyes and enigmatic smile. He'd been on edge ever since, jumping at every shadow, half expecting to see her towering form around every corner. As he rounded a bend, he collided with a solid mass of blue flesh. Charlie stumbled back, his tool belt clanging against the metal floor. "We really need to stop meeting like this." Lyra's melodious voice chuckled from above. Charlie looked up, way up, into the Arctal's amused face. "Lyra, what are you doing here? I thought you were confined to the diplomatic quarters." She raised an eyebrow, the golden markings on her face shimmering in the low light. "And I thought humans valued their sleep cycles. Yet here you are, wandering the station at what you call 3 in the morning." "Touché," Charlie grinned, his earlier nervousness evaporating. "I couldn't sleep. Figured I'd get a head start on some maintenance work." Lyra tilted her head, studying him with those unnerving eyes. "You are an unusual specimen, Charlie. Most of your kind avoid us at all costs, yet you seek out work that might bring you into our path." Charlie shrugged, trying to ignore the way his pulse quickened under her gaze. "What can I say? I'm a sucker for tall, blue, and mysterious." The moment the words left his mouth, he wanted to smack himself. Was he actually flirting with an alien diplomat? But to his surprise, Lyra's lips curved into a genuine smile. Your species' penchant for humor continues to fascinate me, she said. Perhaps you could enlighten me further on this concept of flirtation? Charlie's eyes widened. Uh, well, it's not really something you can explain. It's more of a, you know what? Why don't we start with something simpler? Like jokes. You guys have jokes on Fanara, right? Lyra's brow furrowed. We have word plays that demonstrate intellectual prowess, but I suspect that is not what you mean. Okay, here's an easy one, Charlie said, warming to the subject. Why don't scientists trust atoms? Lyra's expression turned serious. That is concerning. Atomic structure is fundamental to... Because they make up everything, Charlie interrupted with a grin. Lyra stared at him blankly for a moment before her eyes widened in understanding. Ah, a play on the dual meaning of makeup. Clever, if scientifically inaccurate. Charlie couldn't help but laugh at her deadpan delivery. See? You're getting it already. Now you try one. Lyra considered for a moment, then said with perfect seriousness, Why did the human cross the solar system? Charlie blinked. I don't know. Why? To get to the other tide, Lyra replied, her golden eyes twinkling. Charlie groaned, but he couldn't suppress his grin. That's terrible. I love it. As they continued down the corridor, trading increasingly awful jokes, Charlie marveled at how comfortable he felt in Lyra's presence. The initial intimidation of her size and alien appearance had faded, replaced by a growing appreciation for her quick wit and subtle humor. They reached an observation deck, the vast expanse of space stretching out before them. Lyra moved to the window, her towering form silhouetted against the stars. Your station is quaint, she said, her voice tinged with something Charlie couldn't quite identify. But the view is undeniably impressive. Charlie joined her at the window, acutely aware of the difference in their heights. Yeah, it's something else. Although I bet the view from Fanara is pretty spectacular too. Lyra's expression clouded. Fanara is beautiful in its way, but often cold, rigid. She glanced down at Charlie. Your people's ability to find wonder in the chaos of the universe is admirable. Charlie felt a surge of warmth at the compliment. Well, we're basically hairless apes who figured out how to fling ourselves into space. Everything out here is pretty wonder-inducing. Lyra's lips twitched. An apt, if unflattering description? Her golden eyes fixed on Charlie with an intensity that made his breath catch. You are unlike any human I have encountered, Charlie. Your openness, your humor, it is most intriguing. Charlie swallowed hard, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing. Yeah, well, you're pretty intriguing yourself. For a giant blue alien, I mean. Lyra leaned down, bringing her face closer to his. Charlie's heart hammered in his chest. Was she going to? The moment was shattered by the sudden blare of an alarm. Red emergency lights began flashing throughout the corridor. Attention all personnel, a mechanized voice announced. Unauthorized access detected in secure area. Security teams to level 5 immediately. Charlie's eyes widened. Shit. Lyra, you need to get back to your quarters. If they catch you out here... But Lyra was already moving, her long strides carrying her swiftly down the corridor. I shall return to my delegation, she called over her shoulder. But this conversation is not finished, Charlie the repair guy. As she disappeared around a corner, Charlie sagged against the wall, his mind reeling. What the hell was he getting himself into? Over the next few weeks, Charlie found himself drawn into a dance of clandestine meetings and whispered conversations with Lyra. They would accidentally encounter each other in rarely used corridors or deserted observation decks, exchanging jokes, stories, and increasingly heated glances. Charlie introduced Lyra to the finer points of human culture, everything from classic literature to terrible action movies. In return, Lyra shared glimpses of Arctal society, painting a picture of a world both fascinating and oppressively rigid. So let me get this straight, Charlie said one day, as they huddled in a maintenance alcove. You guys don't have any form of entertainment? No music? No art? Nothing? Lyra's brow furrowed. We have pursuits that hone our minds and bodies. Competitive problem solving, displays of physical prowess. but they serve a purpose beyond mere fun. Charlie shook his head in disbelief. That sounds awful. No offense, but your people could really use a good party. Lyra's lips twitched in that not-quite smile that Charlie had come to adore. Perhaps, though I shudder to imagine an Arctal attempting your human dancing. The mental image of Lyra's towering form attempting to bust a move sent Charlie into a fit of laughter. As his chuckles subsided, he noticed Lyra watching him with an expression of longing. I envy your ability to express joy so freely, she said softly. Among my people, such displays are seen as undignified. Charlie's heart clenched at the sadness in her voice. Without thinking, he reached out and took her hand, an action that would have terrified him just weeks ago. Well, there's no one here to judge you now, he said. Why don't you give it a try? Laugh, dance, whatever you want. I promise I won't tell the Arctal Fun Police. Lyra hesitated, her golden eyes searching Charlie's face. Then, to his amazement, she threw back her head and let out a deep, throaty laugh. The sound echoed through the alcove, rich and full of genuine mirth. As her laughter faded, Lyra looked down at Charlie with a mixture of wonder and gratitude. That was most invigorating, she said, a hint of breathlessness in her voice. Charlie grinned up at her, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing. See? A little undignified fun never hurt anyone. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken tension. Charlie found himself leaning in, drawn by some inexorable force. Lyra bent down, her face mere inches from his. The comm link on Charlie's wrist buzzed, shattering the moment. Crow, where the hell are you? Jenkins' irritated voice crackled. We've got a situation in Docking Bay 3. Charlie cursed under his breath. Duty calls, he said apologetically. Same time tomorrow? Lyra nodded, a hint of disappointment in her eyes. Until then, Charlie the repair guy. As Charlie hurried to the docking bay, his mind raced. What was he doing? Sneaking around with an alien diplomat, risking his job, possibly interstellar relations? It was madness. But he couldn't deny the thrill that coursed through him every time he saw Lyra. The way his heart raced when she smiled. The growing certainty that what he felt for her was more than just curiosity or physical attraction. He was falling for her, hard. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just some harmless flirtation anymore. He was in serious danger of losing his heart to a woman from another world. As the days passed, Charlie found it increasingly difficult to focus on his work. His thoughts constantly drifted to Lyra. Her laugh, her subtle humor, the way her golden markings seemed to shimmer when she was excited. He wasn't the only one affected. Lyra's demeanor had softened noticeably, her initial aloofness giving way to a warmth that surprised even her fellow Arctals. Charlie overheard whispers among the station crew, speculation about the change in the alien diplomat's behavior. Their clandestine meetings became more frequent, more intense. They would spend hours talking, laughing, sharing stories of their vastly different worlds. Charlie found himself opening up to Lyra in ways he never had with anyone before, human or otherwise. But as their connection deepened, so did the risks. Charlie noticed increased security patrols in the areas where they usually met. Lyra spoke of growing tensions within the Arctal delegation, whispers of disapproval at her fraternization with humans. It all came to a head one evening as they huddled in a rarely used storage bay. Lyra's usual composure was shaken, her golden eyes clouded with worry. They're recalling me to Finara, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The council believes I've become compromised by my time here. They fear I've grown too close to humans. Charlie's heart sank. When? Tomorrow. Lyra's hands clenched at her sides. I am to cease all unofficial contact with station personnel immediately. Charlie felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. But that's not fair. You're making progress, building understanding between our species. Isn't that what you came here for? Lyra's expression softened as she looked down at him. It is, but my people fear change, Charlie. They see my fondness for you as a weakness, a betrayal of our ways. Fondness? Charlie's voice cracked. Is that all this is to you? Lyra's eyes widened. In a swift movement, she closed the distance between them, her massive form looming over Charlie. But for once, he didn't feel intimidated. He felt safe. "You know it is more than that," Lyra said, her voice low and intense. "What I feel for you, it defies categorization in either of our languages. It is unprecedented." Charlie's heart raced. He reached up, cupping Lyra's face in his hands. The contrast of her blue skin against his pale fingers was startling. Beautiful. "Then don't go," he whispered. "Stay here, with me." For a moment, Lyra leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. Then she straightened, gently removing his hands. "I cannot abandon my duty, Charlie, no matter how much I wish to stay." Charlie felt as if his heart was being ripped in two. "So that's it? We just pretend this never happened?" Lyra's expression was pained. "I do not know what the future holds, but I know that meeting you has changed me, Charlie Crow. You have shown me a side of humanity, of myself, that I never knew existed. For that, I will be forever grateful." She leaned down, pressing her forehead against his in a gesture of surprising tenderness. "Goodbye, Charlie the repair guy. May your stars always shine brightly." Before Charlie could respond, Lyra was gone, her long strides carrying her swiftly from the storage bay. He stood there stunned, feeling as if a vital piece of himself had just walked away. As he made his way back to his quarters, Charlie's mind raced. He couldn't let it end like this. There had to be something he could do, some way to bridge the gap between their worlds. An idea began to form, crazy and risky and probably doomed to failure. But he had to try. For Lyra, for the future of human-Arctal relations, for the chance at a love that transcended species and star systems. Charlie Crow, the unremarkable repair guy, was about to attempt the most daring diplomatic mission in human history. And he was going to need all the bad jokes and clumsy flirtation he could muster to pull it off. As he began to plan, a grin spread across Charlie's face. Life on the station was about to get a whole lot more interesting again. Charlie's heart pounded as he raced through the station's corridors. He had to reach the docking bay before Lyra's ship departed. His half-baked plan tumbled through his mind, equal parts desperation and determination. As he rounded the final corner, he skidded to a halt. The docking bay was a hive of activity, with Arctal delegates and human officials milling about. In the center of it all stood Lyra, her towering form impossible to miss. Charlie took a deep breath and strode forward. "Lyra!" he called out, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. All activity ceased. Heads turned, human and Arctal alike, to stare at the disheveled technician. Lyra's golden eyes widened in surprise. "Charlie?" she said, her melodious voice tinged with confusion. "What are you doing here?" He pushed through the crowd, ignoring the mutters and glares. "I couldn't let you leave," he said, coming to a stop before her. "Not without saying something first." Lyra's brow furrowed. "Charlie, we discussed this. I must return to Fenara. It is my duty." "I know," Charlie said, his voice steady despite his racing pulse. "But what if there was another way? A way for you to fulfill your duty and stay here?" A murmur rippled through the assembled crowd. The human ambassador, a portly man named Reginald, stepped forward with a scowl. "Now see here, Crow," he blustered. "This is a delicate diplomatic situation. You can't just barge in here and—" "Actually," Charlie interrupted, "that's exactly what I'm doing." He turned to address the entire gathering. "Look, I know I'm just a repair guy. I'm not a diplomat or a scientist or anyone important. But I've spent the last few weeks getting to know Lyra, and through her, learning about Arctal culture." He gestured towards Lyra. "And you know what? It's amazing. Different from ours, sure, but fascinating. And I bet if you gave Lyra a chance to really show you human culture, not just stuffy diplomatic meetings, but our art, our music, our terrible jokes, you'd find us pretty interesting too." Lyra's expression softened, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. "Charlie, what are you suggesting?" Charlie grinned up at her. "I'm suggesting you stay, as an ambassador of cultural exchange. Show us your world and let us show you ours. Who better to bridge the gap between our species than someone who's already started to do it? The Arctal delegation began to mutter amongst themselves in their native language. Charlie couldn't understand the words, but the tone didn't sound promising. One of the Arctals, a stern-looking male with intricate golden patterns covering his blue skin, stepped forward. "This is preposterous," he growled. "Lyra's place is on Fanara, not fraternizing with humans." "With all due respect," Charlie countered, "isn't the whole point of this mission to build understanding between our species? Lyra's made more progress in a few weeks than all your official meetings combined." The Arctal's eyes narrowed. "And how would you propose we proceed with such an unorthodox arrangement?" Charlie's mind raced. This was the moment of truth. "A trial period," he said. "Give Lyra 6 months to prove the value of cultural exchange. If at the end of that time you're not satisfied with the progress, she returns to Fanara. No harm, no foul." The human ambassador sputtered. "Now wait just a minute. We can't just—" "Actually," a new voice chimed in, "I think it's an excellent idea." All heads turned to see Dr. Ilara Chen, the station's chief xenobiologist, striding into the docking bay. She fixed Charlie with an approving smile. "Mr. Crow's proposal aligns perfectly with our mission of fostering interspecies cooperation," Dr. Chen continued. "And from a scientific perspective, the opportunity to study arctal physiology and culture in a prolonged, informal setting is invaluable." The human officials huddled together, whispering furiously. The Arctal delegation continued their own heated discussion. Charlie held his breath, his eyes locked on Lyra's face. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Arctal spokesman turned to Lyra. "The decision is yours, Lyra," he said, his tone grave. "But know that if you choose to stay, you do so without the backing of the Arctal High Council. You will be on your own." Lyra straightened to her full, impressive height. Her golden eyes swept over the assembled crowd before coming to rest on Charlie. A slow smile spread across her face. "I choose to stay," she announced, her voice ringing through the docking bay. "As an ambassador of cultural exchange, and as a bridge between our worlds." A cheer erupted from the human side of the gathering. Even some of the Arctals looked quietly pleased, though they tried to hide it. Charlie felt a grin splitting his face, his heart soaring. The next few hours passed in a blur of paperwork, arguments, and hasty arrangements. By the time the dust settled, Lyra had been officially instated as the Arctal Ambassador of Cultural Exchange, with Charlie appointed as her human liaison. As the last of the diplomats filtered out of the docking bay, Lyra and Charlie found themselves alone. She looked down at him, her expression a mix of amusement and fondness. "You are either very brave or very foolish, Charlie Crow," she said softly. Charlie shrugged, a lopsided grin on his face. "Why can't I be both? Besides, if someone had to do something crazy to keep you here." Lyra's laugh, rich and full, echoed through the empty bay. "And now we have 6 months to prove the value of our cultural exchange." "Better get started then," Charlie said, waggling his eyebrows. "I've got a whole list of terrible movies to introduce you to." The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Charlie and Lyra threw themselves into their roles as cultural ambassadors with enthusiasm bordering on mania. They organized movie nights, art exhibitions, and even a disastrous but hilarious attempt at an Arctal human sports tournament. Lyra's presence on the station sparked a wave of curiosity among the human crew. People who had once avoided the Arctals now sought them out, eager to learn about their culture and share their own. Charlie watched with pride as Lyra blossomed in her new role. Her natural grace and intelligence, combined with the sense of humor she'd developed during their clandestine meetings, made her a hit with humans and Arctals alike. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The cultural differences between their species led to plenty of misunderstandings and awkward moments. "Charlie," Lyra said one day, her brow furrowed in confusion, "I do not understand the purpose of this karaoke ritual. Why would humans deliberately sing poorly for the amusement of others?" Charlie couldn't help but laugh. "It's not about singing well, Lyra. It's about having fun and not taking yourself too seriously. Come on, I'll show you." He dragged her to the makeshift stage in the station's rec room, ignoring her protests. As he belted out a terrible rendition of "Don't Stop Believin'," he saw the moment Lyra finally got it. Her eyes lit up with understanding, and to his delight, she joined in for the chorus, her rich voice blending with his in joyful discord. The sight of the towering Arctal diplomat singing Earth pop songs quickly became a favorite among the station's crew. It wasn't long before other Arctals, emboldened by Lyra's example, began to participate in human social activities. But not everyone was thrilled with the changing dynamics on the station. A vocal minority of both humans and Arctals resisted the cultural exchange, clinging to old prejudices and fears. Tensions came to a head 4 months into the experiment. Charlie was working on a particularly stubborn piece of equipment when his comm unit crackled to life. "Charlie!" Lyra's voice was urgent. "There's a situation in the mess hall. I need your help." He dropped his tools and ran, his mind conjuring worst-case scenarios. When he burst into the mess hall, he found a standoff between a group of human crew members and several Arctals. In the center stood Lyra, her usual composure strained. "What's going on?" Charlie demanded, pushing his way to Lyra's side. One of the humans, a burly security officer named Brock, sneered. "These blue freaks think they can just waltz in here and take over. It's time they learned their place." The lead Arctal, a female Charlie recognized as Zira, bristled. "We have every right to be here. Your xenophobic attitudes have no place in this cultural exchange." Charlie could see the situation spiraling out of control. He stepped between the two groups, holding up his hands. "Whoa, whoa, everybody calm down," he said. "We're all here to learn from each other, right? So let's talk this out. What's the real problem here?" For a tense moment, no one spoke. Then, to Charlie's surprise, Brock's tough facade cracked. "They're just so different," he muttered. "It's like they're not even trying to fit in." Sierra's eyes widened in surprise. We were attempting to adapt to human customs. Have we misunderstood?" Charlie saw his opening. "Looks like we've all got some learning to do," he said with a grin. "How about this? Brock, why don't you show Zyra here how to play darts? And Zyra, maybe you could teach Brock that Arctal meditation technique you were telling me about." The tension in the room slowly dissipated as humans and Arctals paired off, awkwardly but earnestly attempting to share their cultures. Charlie felt Lyra's hand on his shoulder. "That was well handled," she said softly. "You have a gift for this, Charlie Crow." He looked up at her, his heart swelling with affection. "I had a good teacher," he replied with a wink. As the 6-month mark approached, Charlie and Lyra worked tirelessly to prepare their final presentation for the Arctal High Council and human officials. They gathered data, testimonials, and evidence of the positive changes brought about by the cultural exchange program. The night before the big presentation, Charlie found Lyra on their favorite observation deck, staring out at the stars. "Nervous?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. Lyra's lips curved in a small smile. "Arctals do not get nervous, Charlie." "Right," he chuckled, "and I'm the Queen of England." She looked down at him, her golden eyes soft in the starlight. "I find myself apprehensive," she admitted. "These past months have been more than I ever expected. The thought of returning to Fanara, of leaving all this behind." She trailed off, her gaze returning to the viewport. Charlie's heart clenched. He reached out, taking her large blue hand in his. "Hey," he said softly, "no matter what happens tomorrow, we've done something amazing here. We've proved that humans and Arctals can not only coexist, but actually like each other. That's huge, Lyra." She squeezed his hand gently. "You are right, of course. And yet," Charlie finished for her, "the thought of saying goodbye sucks." Lyra's laugh was tinged with melancholy. "Your human vernacular continues to amuse me. But yes, it sucks." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, hand in hand, watching the stars. Finally, Charlie spoke. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know something," he said, his voice low and intense. "These past months with you have been the best of my life. You've opened my eyes to a whole new universe, Lyra. And I love you for it." Lyra's eyes widened at the declaration. For a heart-stopping moment, Charlie thought he'd made a terrible mistake. Then slowly she bent down, bringing her face level with his. "Charlie Crow," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have taught me the meaning of that word, and I find that I love you as well." Their lips met in a kiss that was awkward, alien, and absolutely perfect. The next morning, Charlie and Lyra stood side by side before the assembled officials. As Charlie launched into their presentation, he felt a calm certainty settle over him. Whatever the outcome, they had already won something far more valuable than any diplomatic agreement. To his amazement and relief, both the human and Arctal representatives were impressed by the progress made during the cultural exchange. The program was extended indefinitely, with plans to expand it to other stations and even planetside. As the officials filed out, chattering excitedly about the possibilities, Charlie turned to Lyra with a grin. "So, Ambassador," he said, "ready to take on the universe?" Lyra's answering smile was radiant. "With you by my side, Charlie Crow, I believe I am ready for anything." Hand in hand, the unlikely pair set off to continue their grand adventure in cultural exchange. As they walked, Charlie couldn't resist one last quip. "You know," he said, looking up at Lyra with a mischievous glint in his eye, "I think we just gave long-distance relationship a whole new meaning." Lyra's laughter, rich and full of joy, echoed through the station corridors. And in that moment, the future seemed as vast and full of possibility as the starfield beyond the station's walls. As the weeks turned into months, the connection between Charlie and Lyra deepened. What had started as a strange and tentative relationship built on curiosity and mutual respect slowly transformed into something far more profound. The cultural exchange program was thriving, but for Charlie and Lyra, their time together had become about so much more than bridging the gap between species. They spent long nights on the observation deck, gazing at the stars and sharing stories of their worlds, their lives, their dreams. Lyra, who had once been so composed and restrained, began to open up, revealing a depth of emotion that surprised even her. And Charlie, for all his jokes and bravado, found himself captivated by her strength, her wisdom, and the quiet vulnerability she allowed him to see. One evening, after yet another exhausting day of diplomatic meetings and cultural events, they found themselves alone again in their favorite spot. The station was quiet, the rest of the crew having retired for the night. Outside the viewport, the stars shimmered, casting a soft glow over the room. Charlie leaned against the railing, his eyes on the vast expanse of space, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He could feel Lyra's presence beside him, her towering form casting a shadow over his smaller frame. But there was no fear in him now, only a warmth that spread through his chest every time she was near. "Lyra," he said quietly, turning to face her, "these past months, they've been incredible. Not just because of the work we've done, but because of you. I've never felt this way before. About anyone." Lyra's golden eyes met his, soft and thoughtful. She stepped closer, her movements graceful and deliberate. "I too have never experienced anything like this, Charlie," she admitted, her voice a low melodic whisper. "You have shown me a side of life I did not know existed. Among my people, emotions like these are considered distractions. But with you, I have come to see them as something else, something beautiful." Charlie's breath caught in his throat as she moved even closer, until they were standing just inches apart. He could feel the heat radiating from her, the intensity of her gaze holding him captive. "I don't want this to end," Charlie whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "I don't want to lose you." Lyra reached out, her long fingers gently brushing against his cheek. Her touch was cool but electric, sending a shiver down his spine. "You will not lose me," she said softly. "We are bound by something far greater than distance. Our worlds may be light years apart, but our hearts, they are together." Without thinking, Charlie lifted his hand to cover hers, holding it against his cheek. The sensation of her touch, her closeness, was overwhelming. He had never felt so alive, so aware of every beat of his heart, every breath. "Lyra," he murmured, his voice barely audible. And then, before he could second-guess himself, he leaned in, closing the gap between them. His lips met hers in a kiss that was soft at first, tentative, but quickly deepened as their mutual desire took over. Lyra responded with equal fervor, her large hands cradling his face as she pulled him closer, their bodies pressing together. The intensity of the moment surged through them, the weight of their passion crashing down like a tidal wave. Charlie could feel her strength, her power, but there was also a tenderness in her touch, a carefulness that belied her size and stature. Their kiss was long and hungry, filled with the pent-up desire that had been building between them for months. Lyra's lips were soft, her breath warm against his skin. Charlie's hand slid up her arms, feeling the smoothness of her skin, the intricate patterns that marked her body. The stars outside the window seemed to fade into the background as they became lost in each other. Time itself ceased to exist, and all that mattered was the feeling of their bodies entwined, their hearts beating in sync. It was as if the universe had brought them together in this moment, defying the odds, the distance, the differences between their species. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless, their foreheads resting against each other as they struggled to catch their breath. "I love you," Charlie whispered, his voice trembling with the weight of the confession. Lyra smiled, her golden eyes glowing with a warmth that Charlie had never seen before. "And I love you, Charlie Crow, more than I ever thought possible." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, the vastness of space stretching out before them. And in that moment, they knew that no matter what challenges the future might bring, their love was strong enough to overcome them all. Charlie looked up at her, a grin spreading across his face. "So what now?" Lyra laughed softly, her voice like music. "Now, my love, we continue our journey, together." With that, they turned back to the stars, hand in hand, ready to face whatever the universe had in store for them. Their passion, their love, would be the bridge between worlds, a love that transcended the boundaries of space, time, and species. And together they would explore the vastness of the cosmos, united by the unbreakable bond they had forged. As they stood side by side, the stars shining brightly above, the future seemed infinite, full of possibilities and adventures yet to come.